I knew the evening was going to be bad the moment I saw the table. It was too long, too polished, too full of people who were technically my colleagues, but, in practice, were just a chain of ranks and politics waiting for someone like me to trip. White tablecloth, crystal glasses that didn't belong anywhere near a barracks, and the kind of dim lighting that pretends to be intimate, but only makes you more aware of where you don't fit in. I straightened my uniform jacket anyway, tugged it once at the waist, then again at the collar, like I could smooth out the history sewn into the fabric. I'm Staff Sergeant Amara Okoye, United States Air Force, Operations and Mission Planning. Black, woman, first in my family to serve. First in my cohort to get pulled into the classified side of space operations. The only one at that table who got searched twice at the gate and randomly flagged 3 times for extra screening this year alone. And the only one who wasn't supposed to be there. "Smile, Sergeant," my supervisor said as he approached from behind, hand landing on my shoulder, like he owned the right to that contact. "Tonight is a big deal. Commanders don't invite just anyone to these dinners." I forced my face into something close to a smile and turned to him. Major Harris. Sand-colored hair, perpetually sunburned nose, eyes that always seemed to be measuring people against some invisible checklist. Good soldier on paper. Good at charm when it served him. Less good when nobody was watching. "Yes, sir," respondee. Automatic. "I appreciate the opportunity." He gave me the once-over. The slow kind that pretends to be about uniform standards, but lingers just a fraction too long on my hair, my skin, the curve of my jaw. My braids were pinned into a tight bun at the nape of my neck, regulation perfect. My boots were mirror-shined. Everything about me said, prepared. Still, something in his eyes said temporary. "Just remember," he added, dropping his voice, "you're here as my +1, professionally speaking. Don't go trying to impress anyone with your extracurriculars." I knew what he meant. My name had started to pop up in places he thought should belong to him. Briefing rooms, simulation logs, closed-door meetings. And then there was the one detail only a handful of people on Earth knew. I had been selected for a joint training program that technically didn't exist yet on any public record. Astronaut training. Not a guaranteed slot, not yet, but more than most would ever get. I hadn't told him. I didn't have to. Men like him could smell competition. "I'm off duty tonight, sir," I replied. "Just here to listen and not spill the expensive wine." He laughed, too loud for the joke, and guided me toward the head of the table with a hand that stayed on my back 1 second longer than it needed to. I felt my molars grind but kept walking. The room was already filling with uniforms and evening gowns, medals catching the chandelier light, ribbons turning people's chests into colorful lies about honor and sacrifice. Some of them had earned every stripe. I knew that. Others had learned exactly when to be seen and when to disappear, using visibility the way other people used weapons. I found my seat near the middle of the table, 2 chairs down from the colonel and just across from a civilian contractor whose badge hung around his neck like a backstage pass. He glanced at me, then at my rank, then at my skin. The smile he gave me didn't quite reach his eyes. "First time at one of these, Sergeant?" he asked. You could always tell when someone thought you should be grateful. "No, sir," I said. "But first time with this particular guest list." "Ah." He nodded, already losing interest now that he'd confirmed I wasn't anyone important. "Well, just remember, a lot of careers get made over dinners like this, and a lot get stalled." I gave him a polite nod, the kind that didn't promise anything. My career had been stalled since the day I walked into basic training and realized that my scores would have to be perfect just to be considered acceptable next to someone else's average. And yet, somehow, I'd still found a way into rooms they never wanted me in. The clinking of silverware on glass pulled everyone's attention to the far end of the table. Colonel Marquez stood, lifting his glass halfway in a gesture of practiced authority. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began. "Thank you for joining us tonight. We're here to celebrate a successful quarter, welcome some new faces, and acknowledge the hard work that keeps this base, and our missions, running." Applause rippled down the table. I joined in, even though a part of me always felt like these speeches were more about performance than gratitude. Still, there was something about hearing our missions that made my spine straighten a little. Hidden in that phrase were satellites I had helped reposition, simulations I had run, threats I had helped neutralize from behind classification levels I couldn't talk about at Sunday dinner. "And," he continued, "we're especially grateful for those who take on extra burdens to help us meet our quotas for diversity and inclusion. It's important work." The word quota caught in my ears like a shard of glass. There it was, dropped casually into a sentence that sounded harmless, but wasn't. I felt my face remain neutral by sheer discipline alone. The colonel moved on, talking about budgets and partnerships and the future of space operations. People nodded, laughed at the right moments, lifted glasses when prompted. The food came out in stages, carried by servers who moved like ghosts through the room. Salad first, then some kind of chicken that looked like it had been designed by committee. By the time the plates arrived, the conversation along the table had broken into smaller clusters. To my left, two captains swapped deployment stories, trying to outdo each other with tales of hardship that always ended in their own heroism. To my right, Major Harris leaned in toward the civilian contractor, lowering his voice in that conspiratorial way that said he wanted to be heard without looking like he wanted to be heard. "Of course, once we hit the diversity targets, everything got easier," Harris was saying. "They stopped breathing down our necks about it." I kept my eyes on my plate, cutting my chicken into small, precise pieces. My fork moved, but my ears worked just fine. "Still," the contractor replied, "you've got to manage expectations. You can't let them think checking a box means they get a fast track. Them. Box. Fast track." I took a steadying breath, stabbed a piece of chicken, and kept my jaw relaxed. The uniform on my back suddenly felt heavier, as if each ribbon weighed more than its fabric. "Exactly," Harris said. "I mean, don't get me wrong. Some of them are sharp. Real sharp. But you know how it is. The higher-ups love their optics. As long as the photos look good, they're happy." The contractor chuckled. "Optics keep the money flowing." "Optics keep the money flowing," Harris agreed, lifting his glass to that. Something hot flickered in my chest. I thought of the hours I had spent in the sim lab, the test results that had come back with numbers I had stared at 3 times just to make sure they weren't mistakes. I thought of the physicals, the psychological evaluations, the sleep-deprived late nights planning operations that nobody outside that building would ever know I'd touched. Optics. Harris must have felt my attention on him, because he turned slightly in his chair, including me in his line of sight while still facing the contractor. "Take Sergeant Okoye here," he said, and my name in his mouth felt like something he'd picked up with 2 fingers. Sharp as they come, tech, planning, all that, and HQ loves her naturally. The contractor glanced at me, then back at Harris. "Naturally?" Harris smiled, the kind that showed teeth without warmth. "She ticks a lot of boxes," he said. "Female, black, first-generation military. You should have seen the email chains when we brought her into the unit. I thought public affairs was going to throw a parade." A few people nearby glanced over, drawn by his volume and the familiarity with which he said it. My skin prickled, but my spine stayed straight. There is an art to being still under fire. I had learned it in training exercises with simulated explosions, and now I used it at dinner tables with real shrapnel made of words. "Major," I said evenly. "With respect." He cut me off with a laugh, patting the air as if I was overreacting to a joke he hadn't finished yet. "Relax, Sergeant," he said. "You know what I mean. You work hard. Nobody's denying that." His hand went to my shoulder again, casual, proprietary. The room seemed to tilt a fraction. But let's not pretend the numbers didn't help, he added. If we didn't have quotas, I wouldn't have half the talent I've got in my shop. I call it the best clerical error the Pentagon ever made. The contractor laughed. And then he said it. You're a quota error. Oh. The words slipped out of his mouth like they were nothing, like they were clever, like they were harmless. The table around us went weirdly quiet, in that way where nobody wants to acknowledge what they just heard, but everyone heard it. Quota error. It landed in my chest with the dull finality of a slammed door. Suddenly, all the hours I had sweated through training, all the nights I had stayed late to run one more diagnostic, all the times I had swallowed comments and smiled because rank demanded it, they all rearranged themselves around that phrase, as if he had just tried to rename my entire life in 3 words. My fingers tightened around my fork. I felt the tendons in my hand pull taut. A tiny part of my brain helpfully informed me that stabbing my superior with government-issued cutlery would likely end poorly for my career. I exhaled slowly through my nose. "Sir," I said, my voice very calm. "I'm here because I earned my place." Harris grinned, leaning back, enjoying the attention. "Of course you are, Okoye," he said, loud enough that the colonel at the end of the table glanced over. "Don't be so serious. It's a compliment. You're the best mistake the system ever made." Someone down the table snorted into their wine. Heat climbed up my neck, but it wasn't shame. Not this time. It was something older and sharper, something that remembered every comment like this since high school. Every time someone assumed my scholarship was charity, that my presence in a room was a favor, that my capability was an accident. Quota error. I set my fork down carefully, aligning it with the edge of my plate. The movement was small, controlled. My mother used to say that not every battle required a raised voice. Some required precision. Some required patience. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" I asked. He smirked. "You always do, Okoye. Go ahead." The room quieted another notch, as if the air itself was leaning closer. I opened my mouth. And then, from across the room, a voice cut through the hum of conversation, like a sharp, clean line. "Captain Okoye?" The title hit me first, then the tone. Clear, authoritative, carrying the kind of weight you can't fake. I turned, heart lurching for a reason that had nothing to do with rank. There he was, standing just inside the doorway in a dark suit that fit like it had been made for him. Tie slightly loosened, short hair still carrying the discipline of years in uniform, even though he wasn't wearing one tonight. His presence bent the attention in the room without effort. People recognized him without knowing why, and he was looking directly at me. The table froze, forks halfway to mouths, conversations cut in mid-sentence. Major Harris's hand slipped from my shoulder. The colonel stood halfway, as if he wasn't sure whether to sit back down or come to attention. Because the man in the doorway wasn't just any guest. He was Commander Elias Ward, astronaut, mission specialist. The kind of name that showed up in recruitment posters and classified briefings. The kind of face people associated with heroism and the future of spaceflight. And, inconveniently for everyone at that table except me, he was also my boyfriend. For a moment, the entire room seemed to forget how to breathe. Commander Elias Ward stood in the doorway with the kind of stillness that only comes from years of sitting on top of rockets, waiting for ignition. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to move. His presence alone shifted the gravity in the room. I forced myself to stay seated, to keep my expression neutral, even though every nerve in my body wanted to stand, to smile, to cross the room and remind myself that he was real and not some fever dream I'd conjured up during another sleepless night in the mission planning bay. But we had rules. We had to. Dating across certain operational lines wasn't technically forbidden, but it wasn't exactly encouraged either, especially when one of you was still climbing the ladder and the other was already halfway to orbit. So we'd kept it quiet. Careful. Private dinners off base, encrypted messages, weekends in cities where nobody from work would run into us. And now here he was, standing in the middle of my supervisor's smug little dinner party, using a rank I didn't officially have yet. Captain. The word hung in the air like a detonation nobody had seen coming. Major Harris blinked, his mouth half open, trying to recalibrate. The contractor next to him had gone very still, wineglass frozen halfway to his lips. Down the table, Colonel Marquez slowly set down his fork, his face shifting from confusion to something that looked uncomfortably close to alarm. "Commander Ward," the colonel said, standing fully now, smoothing his uniform jacket in a reflexive gesture of respect. "We weren't expecting you tonight." Elias didn't look at him. His eyes stayed on me, steady and warm in a way that made my chest tighten. Then finally, he turned his attention to the colonel with a polite, practiced smile. "Apologies for the intrusion, Colonel," he said. "I was in town for a debrief and heard Captain Okoye might be here. Thought I'd stop by and say hello." There it was again. Captain Okoye. The room seemed to tilt sideways. I saw the contractor's eyes flick between Elias and me, trying to do the math. Major Harris's face had gone a shade paler, his smugness evaporating like steam off hot asphalt. Colonel Marquez cleared his throat. "Captain. Commander, I think there's been some mistake. Sergeant Okoye is promoted," Elias said smoothly, cutting him off with the kind of authority that didn't need volume. "As of 0800 this morning. Direct commission into the Space Operations Division. I'm surprised you haven't seen the orders yet, Colonel. They went out early today." Silence. The kind of silence that follows an explosion, when your ears are still ringing and your brain is trying to catch up with what just happened. I kept my face absolutely still, even though my heart was hammering so hard I was sure people could see it through my uniform. I hadn't known. He hadn't told me. We'd texted that morning, the usual quick exchange before my shift started. Nothing about promotions or orders, or anything that would explain why he was currently blowing up my cover and possibly my entire career trajectory in front of a room full of people who had spent the evening treating me like a diversity checkbox. But Elias wasn't reckless. If he was doing this, there was a reason. The colonel's mouth opened and closed once, twice, like a fish trying to process oxygen in a new atmosphere. "I hadn't received notification." "Classified channels," Elias replied, his tone pleasant but firm. "You'll get the memo Monday morning. In the meantime, I'd appreciate it if you'd allow me a moment to speak with Captain Okoye. There are some mission-sensitive items we need to discuss." Mission-sensitive. The phrase was a brick wall, polite but absolute. You didn't argue with mission-sensitive, not when it came from a commander with Elias's clearance level. Colonel Marquez nodded slowly, still visibly trying to piece together how his dinner party had just turned into a national security briefing. "Of course, Commander. By all means." Elias finally looked directly at me, and for just a fraction of a second, I saw the corner of his mouth twitch in what might have been amusement, or solidarity, or both. "Captain," he said, extending a hand toward the door. "If you don't mind." I stood, my legs moving on autopilot, and placed my napkin beside my plate with deliberate care. Every movement felt magnified, like I was performing surgery under a spotlight. I could feel Major Harris's stare burning into the side of my face, could hear the unasked questions piling up around the table like kindling waiting for a spark. I walked toward Elias, boots silent on the carpet, and when I reached him, he stepped aside just enough to let me pass through the doorway first. The small gesture of respect wasn't lost on anyone watching. The moment we stepped into the hallway and the door clicked shut behind us, I turned on him. "What the hell was that?" I hissed, keeping my voice low even though we were alone. He glanced down the hallway, then back at me, and his expression softened into something closer to the man I knew. The man who texted me terrible puns at 2 a.m. when he couldn't sleep. The man who had once spent an entire Sunday teaching me how to make his grandmother's jollof rice because I'd mentioned missing home cooking. That he said quietly. Was me making sure you didn't have to sit through another second of that garbage. I stared at him. You heard? Enough. His jaw tightened. I got here 10 minutes ago. Stood outside the door long enough to hear your supervisor call you a quota error and then laugh about it like it was a toast-worthy joke. The heat rushed back into my face. But this time, it wasn't anger. It was something closer to relief, or maybe vindication. The feeling of being seen when you'd been fighting to stay invisible. Elias, you can't just... I didn't lie, he interrupted. The promotion is real. The orders went through this morning. I was going to call you tonight to tell you, but then I found out you'd be here. And I thought... He exhaled, running a hand over his head in a gesture I recognized as frustration. I thought I'd surprise you. And then I walked in and heard that, and I realized you needed backup more than you needed a surprise. I blinked. Captain? Captain, he confirmed. Direct commission. You've been selected for the Accelerated Astronaut Candidate Program. Congratulations, Amara. The words didn't land right away. They hovered somewhere outside my body, too big to fit inside the narrow hallway, too surreal to attach to anything I recognized as my life. What? He smiled, the real one this time, the one that crinkled the corners of his eyes. You passed every eval, every sim, every psych screening. You outperformed candidates with twice your flight hours. The selection board didn't just pick you, Amara. They fought for you. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. My brain was still 3 steps behind, stuck somewhere between quota error and Captain Okoye and trying to reconcile the two. Breathe, Elias said gently, and I realized I'd been holding my breath. I exhaled, slow and shaky. You're serious. Dead serious. The paperwork's already filed. You report to Houston in 6 weeks for orientation. Houston, astronaut training. The thing I'd been working toward in secret for 2 years. The dream I barely let myself believe in, because hoping too hard felt like tempting fate. I didn't. I swallowed hard. I didn't know it was happening this fast. Neither did I, he admitted. They moved the timeline up. Budget cycles, political pressure, the usual chaos. But you're in, Amara. You earned it. Earned it. The words settled into my chest like an anchor, heavy and solid and real. Behind us, I heard the muffled sound of conversation resuming in the dining room, voices rising back to normal levels as people tried to pretend the last 5 minutes hadn't just rewritten the evening. They're going to ask questions, I said. Harris is going to keep his mouth shut, Elias said, his voice dropping into something colder, sharper. Because if he doesn't, I'll make sure every comment he made tonight ends up in a formal report on my desk. And trust me, the Pentagon takes a very dim view of supervisors who create hostile environments for newly promoted officers in classified programs. I looked up at him, really looked at him, and saw the anger simmering just beneath the surface. Elias was good at control, at keeping his emotions locked down under layers of training and protocol. But I'd seen him like this before, the night he told me about the instructor who'd tried to wash him out of flight school for attitude problems that mysteriously only applied to the black candidates. He didn't explode. He didn't yell. He just became very, very precise. You didn't have to do this, I said quietly. Yes, I did. He stepped closer, lowering his voice even further. You've spent 2 years pretending you don't belong in rooms like that because people like Harris made you think your presence was a favor instead of a right. I'm not letting that stand. Not tonight. Not ever. My throat tightened. I wanted to argue, to tell him I could fight my own battles, that I didn't need rescuing. But the truth was messier than that. The truth was that I had been fighting every single day. and sometimes the weight of it was so exhausting that I forgot what it felt like to have someone stand beside me, instead of in front of me, or behind me. "Thank you," I said, and meant it. He nodded once, then glanced back at the door. "You want to go back in there, or do you want to get out of here?" I considered it. Part of me wanted to walk back into that room with my new rank shining like armor, to watch Major Harris choke on his wine, to see the contractor's face when he realized he'd just insulted a future astronaut. But a bigger part of me was done. Done with performing. Done with proving. Done with spaces that only valued me when someone more powerful validated my existence. "Let's go," I said. Elias smiled. "Good call." We walked down the hallway side by side, our footsteps falling into an easy rhythm. As we pushed through the exit doors and stepped out into the cool night air, I felt something loosen in my chest, something I hadn't realized I'd been holding on to. "So," I said as we reached the parking lot, "you really showed up at my supervisor's dinner party and promoted me in front of everyone." "Technically, the Air Force promoted you," he said. "I just delivered the news with better timing." I laughed, the sound surprising me. Harris is going to lose his mind. Good. Elias unlocked his car, then paused, turning to face me fully. "Amara, you know this doesn't change anything between us, right? You're still going to have to work twice as hard as everyone else. People are still going to question whether you deserve to be there. The promotion doesn't erase that." "I know," I said. And I did. I'd known it my entire career, my entire life. The only difference now was that I had a rank that matched my capability, and a program that had chosen me not because I checked a box, but because I'd proven I could do the job. "But," he continued, "now you've got something they can't take away. You've got the title, the clearance, and the orders. And when you walk into that training facility in Houston, you're walking in as Captain Amara Okoye, astronaut candidate, not a quota, not an error, a candidate." I looked at him, this man who had somehow found a way to be both my partner and my ally without ever making me feel like I needed saving. And I felt something shift. Not gratitude, exactly. Something steadier. Something like certainty. "You know they're going to ask how we know each other," I said. He grinned. "Let them ask." "Elias, we've been careful for 2 years, Amara. We followed every rule, kept every boundary. But you're transferring divisions now. Different chain of command. No conflict of interest." He stepped closer, his voice softening. "I'm done hiding you, if that's okay with you." My heart did something complicated in my chest. "You sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." I took a breath, then nodded. "Okay. Okay? Okay." He smiled, the kind that reached all the way to his eyes, and for a moment we just stood there in the parking lot, 2 people in uniforms under a sky full of stars we were both training to reach. And then my phone buzzed. I pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and felt my stomach drop. It was a message from Colonel Marquez. "Sergeant, Captain Okoye, please report to my office Monday morning, 0700. We need to discuss your new assignment and some concerns that have been raised regarding tonight's events." I showed Elias the screen. He read it, then shook his head. "Let me guess. Harris is already trying to spin this." "Probably." "You worried?" I thought about it. Thought about walking into that office, about facing whatever story Harris had constructed, about the politics and the doubts and the endless, exhausting need to prove myself one more time. Then I thought about Houston, about the program, about the fact that in 6 weeks, I'd be training alongside people who had earned their seats the same way I had. "No," I said. "I'm not worried." Elias squeezed my shoulder once, briefly. "Good. Because you've got this." And for the first time in a long time, I believed him. Monday morning arrived cold and gray, the kind of weather that matches the knot in your stomach when you know you're walking into a fight. I stood outside Colonel Marquez's office at 0655, uniform pressed sharp enough to cut, boots reflecting the fluorescent hallway lights. My new rank insignia felt strange on my shoulders, heavier than the old ones even though the physical difference was negligible. Captain. The word still didn't feel real. Like borrowed clothing I hadn't quite grown into yet. The door was closed. Through the frosted glass, I could see shadows moving, hear the low murmur of voices. More than one person in there. My jaw tightened. An audience, then. They were making this official. At exactly 700, the door opened. Colonel Marquez stood in the frame, his expression unreadable. Behind him, I could see Major Harris sitting stiffly in one of the chairs facing the desk, and another figure I recognized immediately. Lieutenant Colonel Diane Chen, from the Inspector General's office. She was the kind of officer who showed up when things had escalated past the point of quiet resolution. This wasn't just a meeting. This was an investigation. Captain Okoye, Marquez said, stepping aside. Come in. I walked in, spine straight, and came to attention in front of his desk. Marquez gestured to the empty chair next to Harris. I sat, keeping a careful foot of space between us. Harris didn't look at me. His eyes were fixed on some point in the middle distance, his jaw working like he was chewing on words he couldn't say out loud. Lieutenant Colonel Chen sat across from us, a tablet open on her lap, and a recorder sitting on the desk between us, its red light already blinking. Captain Okoye, she began, her voice crisp and professional. Thank you for coming in on short notice. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Chen from the IG's office. I'm here to gather statements regarding an incident that occurred at a dining event this past Saturday evening. Do you understand why you're here? Yes, ma'am. Good. For the record, this conversation is being recorded. You have the right to consult with legal counsel before answering any questions. Do you wish to do so? I considered it. The smart move was probably to lawyer up, to protect myself from whatever narrative Harris had already constructed. But I also knew that requesting counsel would make me look defensive, like I had something to hide. And I didn't. I had sat at a table, been insulted by my supervisor, and then been publicly recognized by a commanding officer. The facts were clean. No, ma'am, I said. I'm comfortable proceeding. Chen nodded and tapped something on her tablet. Let's start with Saturday evening. Can you describe, in your own words, what happened at the dinner? I took a breath, organizing my thoughts into the kind of clear, linear report the military preferred. I attended a professional dinner as a guest of Major Harris. During the meal, a conversation occurred in which Major Harris referred to me as a quota error in front of other attendees, including a civilian contractor. Shortly after, Commander Elias Ward arrived and informed the group that I had been promoted to captain and selected for a classified program. Commander Ward then asked to speak with me privately, and we left the dining room. Chen's pen moved across her tablet. And prior to Major Harris's comment, had there been any other remarks or behavior that made you uncomfortable? I glanced at Harris. His face was red now, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair. Marquez sat behind his desk, silent, watching. Yes, ma'am, I said. Major Harris made several comments during dinner about my selection for the unit being primarily due to diversity quotas rather than qualifications. He also made remarks about optics and suggested that my presence in the unit was largely for appearances. Did he say this directly to you? Some of it. Other comments were made to a civilian contractor seated next to him, but loud enough for me and others at the table to hear. Chen made another note. How did these comments make you feel? It was a strange question, almost therapeutic, but I understood why she was asking. Intent mattered in these cases, but so did impact. You could claim a joke was harmless all you wanted, but if it created a hostile environment, the damage was real. Disrespected, I said carefully, diminished. Like my work and qualifications were being erased in favor of a narrative that made me a token, rather than a peer. Harris shifted in his seat. That's not... Major Harris, Chen cut him off smoothly. You'll have your opportunity to provide your statement. Right now, I'm speaking with Captain Okoye. He closed his mouth, his jaw tightening. Chen turned back to me. Did you respond to Major Harris's comments during the dinner? I asked permission to speak freely. Before I could, Commander Ward arrived. Had you been in contact with Commander Ward prior to his arrival? No, ma'am. I didn't know he would be there. And what is your relationship with Commander Ward? There it was, the question I'd been expecting, the one that could complicate everything. I met her eyes directly. Commander Ward and I have been in a personal relationship for approximately 2 years, ma'am. Marquez's eyebrows rose slightly. Harris's head snapped toward me, his expression a mix of shock and something that looked uncomfortably close to vindication. Chen's face remained neutral. A personal relationship. Can you clarify? We're dating, ma'am. We met during a joint training exercise and have maintained a relationship outside of duty hours. At the time the relationship began, we were in different units with no overlapping chain of command. We followed all protocols regarding fraternization and disclosure. Did Major Harris know about this relationship? No, ma'am. Very few people did. We kept it private to avoid any appearance of impropriety. Chen tapped her tablet again, and I could almost hear the wheels turning. A relationship with a high-profile astronaut. A surprise promotion announced publicly. A supervisor with a pattern of dismissive comments. The optics were messy, but the facts were defensible. Captain Okoye, she said slowly, some might suggest that your promotion and selection for the astronaut program were influenced by your relationship with Commander Ward. There it was, the accusation, dressed up as a hypothetical. With respect, ma'am, I said, keeping my voice even. My selection was based on 2 years of evaluations, simulations, physical testing, and psychological screenings conducted by a board that didn't include Commander Ward. My scores and performance records are documented. If anyone wants to question my qualifications, those records are available for review. And Commander Ward had no input into the selection process? None that I'm aware of, ma'am. He's mission crew, not selection board. Different chain entirely. She nodded slowly, making another note. Then she turned to Harris. Major Harris, let's hear your version of events. Harris sat up straighter, clearing his throat. Ma'am, I think there's been a significant misunderstanding. The comment I made was intended as light-hearted banter, not as a serious statement about Sergeant, Captain Okoye's qualifications. We have a collegial relationship, and I've always supported her career. I kept my face completely still, but inside, something cold and sharp settled into place. Light-hearted banter. The oldest excuse in the book. Chen looked at him steadily. Calling someone a quota error is light-hearted banter? It was a joke about Pentagon bureaucracy, Harris said quickly. Not about her personally. I was commenting on the system, not her abilities. And did Captain Okoye laugh at this joke? Harris hesitated. I don't recall. Did anyone else at the table laugh? The contractor, I think. Maybe 1 or 2 others. But not Captain Okoye. No. So your light-hearted banter was met with silence from the person it was directed at, and laughter from others. Does that sound like a joke everyone was in on? Major? Harris's face flushed darker. I didn't intend... Intent is important, Chen interrupted. But so is impact. And the impact, Major Harris, is that you created an environment in which a subordinate officer felt demeaned in front of peers and civilians. She wasn't subordinate at the time, Harris shot back. She was a sergeant. I'm a major. That's just how conversations go. Conversations where you call your troops errors? Silence. Marquez finally spoke. Major Harris, Did you or did you not refer to Captain Okoye as a quota error during dinner on Saturday? Harris's mouth opened and closed. It wasn't phrased that way. Then how was it phrased? Harris looked at me, then back at Marquez. I said she was the best mistake the system ever made. I meant it as a compliment. A compliment, Chen repeated flatly. Yes. Calling someone a mistake is a compliment in your view? In context. Major Harris, Chen said, her patience clearly thinning. I've reviewed statements from 3 other attendees at that dinner. All 3 confirm that you made multiple comments about quotas, diversity mandates, and Captain Okoye's selection being driven by demographics rather than merit. One witness described your tone as dismissive. Another said you placed your hand on Captain Okoye's shoulder in a manner they found inappropriate. Would you like to revise your statement? Harris's face went pale. He hadn't expected witnesses. He'd thought it would be his word against mine, a major against a sergeant. But I wasn't a sergeant anymore, and he wasn't the only one who'd been paying attention. He swallowed hard. I may have misjudged the tone. Misjudged, Chen said. Interesting word choice. She set her tablet down and leaned forward slightly, her gaze sharp. Major Harris, here's what I see. I see a pattern of behavior in which you made demeaning comments about a subordinate's qualifications based on her race and gender. I see you dismissing her accomplishments as products of policy rather than merit. And I see you doing this publicly, in front of peers and civilians, creating a hostile environment. Do you understand that this constitutes a violation of equal opportunity policy? Harris said nothing. Furthermore, Chen continued, your suggestion that Captain Okoye's promotion was influenced by her personal relationship with Commander Ward, without any evidence to support that claim, constitutes retaliation. And retaliation, Major, is taken very seriously. Marquez cleared his throat. Lieutenant Colonel Chen, what's your recommendation? Chen glanced at her notes, then back at Harris. Formal reprimand, mandatory EO training, and removal from any supervisory role over Captain Okoye or her reassignment to another unit. Additionally, I'll be recommending a review of Major Harris's leadership climate over the past 12 months to determine if there are other instances of similar behavior. Harris looked like he'd been struck. Ma'am, that will destroy my career. No, Major, Chen said quietly. Your behavior destroyed your career. I'm just documenting it. She stood, and Marquez and I stood with her. Harris remained seated, staring at the floor. Captain Okoye, Chen said, turning to me. Thank you for your cooperation. If you experience any retaliation or further issues, you report directly to my office. Understood. Yes, ma'am. She nodded once, then left the room, taking the recorder with her. Marquez exhaled slowly, rubbing his temples. Captain Okoye, you're dismissed. We'll be in touch regarding your transition timeline to Houston. Thank you, sir. I turned to leave, but as I reached the door, Harris finally spoke. You set me up. I stopped, turned back. He was looking at me now, his eyes full of anger and something that might have been betrayal. You knew Ward was coming, he said. You planned this. I met his gaze, calm and steady. I didn't plan anything, Major. I just showed up to a dinner and did my job. You're the one who decided to make it about anything else. You ruined me. No, I said quietly. You did that yourself. And then I walked out, closing the door behind me. The hallway was empty, but I didn't feel alone. I felt lighter, like I'd been carrying a weight I didn't know I had until it was gone. My phone buzzed, a text from Elias. How'd it go? I typed back quickly. Tell you tonight. Dinner? His response came almost immediately. Your place or mine? I smiled. Yours. I'll bring dessert. You're the dessert. I rolled my eyes, still smiling, and pocketed my phone. 6 weeks until Houston. 6 weeks until I walked into astronaut training as Captain Amara Okoye. Not because someone handed me a spot, not because I checked a box, but because I earned it. And for the first time in my career, I wasn't going to apologize for taking up space. 6 weeks sounds like a long time until it's all you have. Those days between the meeting with Colonel Marquez and my report date to Houston moved in a strange rhythm, like a countdown that only I could hear. Every morning I woke up to the same base, the same sky, the same routine. But everything underneath was shifting. My name appeared on new distribution lists. Emails started arriving with Captain Okoye in the header. People who had never bothered to make eye contact with me in the hallway suddenly found reasons to stop and say congratulations. Some of them meant it. Some of them were recalibrating their sense of who was worth knowing. I learned to nod, to smile just enough, to file each interaction into one of two mental folders, genuine or strategic. I stopped taking either personally. That, more than anything, felt like a promotion. Harris kept his distance. I saw him twice after the IG meeting. Once in the parking lot, where he pretended not to see me. Once in the operations building, where his conversation died mid-sentence when I walked by. Rumor traveled faster than official memos on base. By the end of the week, everyone knew he'd been pulled from supervisory duty and reassigned to administrative tasks pending review. Nobody said the word punishment out loud. They didn't have to. In a culture built on progression and command, being benched was its own kind of exile. I thought I'd feel triumphant. I didn't. What I felt was clean, like a room that had needed airing out for years and finally got a window opened. The mold was still there, but at least now there was light and circulation, and other people could see what had been growing in the dark. The night before I left for Houston, I stood in my almost empty on-base apartment, surrounded by boxes that held my life in neat labeled sections. Uniforms, books, kitchen, random stuff. I probably don't need but can't throw away. I'd left one duffel open on the bed, half-packed. Orders, ID. A small notebook worn soft at the edges where I'd written down every goal I'd ever been afraid to say out loud. The last page had one sentence, written in steadier handwriting than when I started. Become an astronaut not to escape Earth, but to see it clearly. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. Almost ready? Elias. I looked around the apartment. The walls were bare. The echoes sounded different. I typed back, as ready as I'll ever be. He replied with a single word, downstairs. I grabbed my duffel, took one last look around, and turned off the lights. The click of the door behind me sounded like punctuation. He was leaning against his car by the curb, hands in his pockets, head tilted back as he watched the sky. The base lighting washed everything in a dull orange glow, but the stars still cut through if you knew where to look. You're early, I said, walking up. He smiled. You're late. I'm right on time. That's what everyone says before they miss a launch window. I rolled my eyes. You are not comparing my move to Houston with a launch window. Timing is everything, he said, but his voice was softer. His gaze flicked to the duffel on my shoulder. That all you're taking? The rest is being shipped, I said. Figured I'd travel light. New life, minimal baggage. Emotional or physical. Don't get ahead of yourself, Ward. He laughed, then reached for the duffel. Here, let me. I've got it. I know you do. I'm still going to carry it. I hesitated half a second, then let him take it. There was something strangely intimate about watching him lift the bag that held the things I'd chosen as essential. He put it in the trunk with the same careful efficiency he applied to stowing gear on a spacecraft. We drove off base in comfortable silence, the guard at the gate saluting as we passed. This had been my world for years. Checkpoints and clearances, and the low-level hum of constant readiness. I knew I'd be trading one controlled environment for another in Houston, but this goodbye still felt heavy. So, Elias said after a few minutes, eyes on the road. How are you feeling, Captain? Nervous, I admitted. Excited. Like someone's about to realize they addressed the orders to the wrong person. He glanced over at me. Imposter syndrome is mandatory for the first month. After that, it's just inefficient. You still get it? Every time I sit in the simulator and remember there are 1,000 people who would kill to be in that seat, he said. Then I remember I worked my ass off to be one of the few they called. So did you. I looked out the window at the blur of highway lights. Harris would disagree. Harris is a footnote, Elias said. You are the story. It's not that simple? No, he agreed. It's not. You'll deal with Harris again. Different names, same attitude. People who need to believe you're an exception so they can pretend the rule stays intact. People who'd rather imagine a glitch in the system than accept that the system finally did something right. I smiled faintly. You always this poetic in traffic? Only for you. He pulled off the highway toward the small town just outside base, our halfway spot. The neutral ground where we'd met for coffee on countless weekends. Two people in civilian clothes trying to carve out a life that wasn't defined entirely by rank and mission codes. We ended up at the same diner where we'd had our first official not a date. Same cracked leather booths, same buzzing neon sign, same waitress who pretended not to recognize us even though she absolutely did. We slid into a booth. He ordered coffee. I ordered tea and a slice of pie I wasn't sure I'd be able to eat. So, he said, when the waitress walked away, tell me what you're afraid of. Subtle. I've seen your file, Amara. You don't scare easy. If you're nervous, it's not about training. It's about something else. I traced a finger along a scratch in the tabletop. What if I get there and I'm exactly what they said I was? Who? Everyone who ever thought I was a symbol first and a person second, I said. Everyone who needed me to be a diversity win more than a competent officer. What if I walk into that building and they look at me and think, like, quota met, before they think candidate accepted? You will be the only one who can decide which story you're living, Elias said quietly. If you spend your time trying to prove you're not what they think, you're still letting them dictate the frame. You're not there to be an argument. You're there to be an astronaut. Easy for you to say. You don't walk into rooms and feel like a statistic. He held my gaze. You think I don't? I stopped. Of course he did. A black man in one of the whitest, most exclusive programs on the planet? His entire career was a conversation with other people's expectations. Right, I said. Sorry. Don't be, he said. Just don't erase my battles because they don't look exactly like yours. We're playing on different levels of the same game. What made it easier for you? I asked. He thought about it, realizing that some people would always see me as the exception, not like the others. The one who proved the system was fair, and then deciding I didn't care. I wasn't going to spend my life being grateful for a seat in a rigged game. I was going to learn the rules, beat them, and then change them when I could. Change them how? By making sure I wasn't the last, he said simply. By opening the door behind me instead of letting it swing shut. The pie arrived. I picked up my fork, cut a slice, and realized I was actually hungry. What door am I opening? I asked. You're a black woman captain in an astronaut program that still sends out posters with mostly white faces, he said. You'll figure it out. I don't want to be an icon. Good, he said. Icons are static. You're not. We ate in thoughtful silence. Around us, life went on. Teenagers in hoodies laughing too loudly in the corner booth, an old couple sharing a plate, a trucker at the counter staring at his phone. Nobody knew that two people at the back table were talking about space and systemic bias, and who gets to leave the planet and come back a hero. When the check came, he grabbed it before I could. You get the next one, he said. Next one will be in Houston, I reminded him. Then I guess I'd better visit. You planning on it? Wild idea, he said. Dating someone you can actually see more than once a month. That sounds like sorcery. He smiled, then grew serious again. We'll have to be careful. Same rules, different town. But the chain of command lines are cleaner now. Fewer conflicts. It's possible. And if it isn't? Then we reassess, he said. But we don't decide for them that we're a problem before they even look at the facts. We walked out of the diner into the cool night air. The stars were brighter here, away from base lights. I tilted my head back, tracing constellations I'd memorized years ago. Orion, Cassiopeia, the Pleiades. Familiar shapes, ancient stories, soon-to-be navigational references instead of just myths. You know what gets me? I said. What? They'll call it a giant leap, I said. Any mission I end up on, any milestone I hit, they'll talk about representation and history and how far we've come, and it will be all of those things. But for me, it won't feel like a leap. It'll feel like every step I took from basic training to that dinner table to this parking lot. Leaps are just walks nobody was paying attention to until the last second, he said. I smiled. That's good. Did you steal it from somewhere? From you, he said. You just didn't hear yourself say it yet. He walked me back to my temporary quarters off base, the ones I'd be staying in for a few hours before an early flight. At the door, we stopped. This is the part where I say something profound and quotable before you go change your life, he said. Don't, I said. Just be here. I am, he said. I will be. He reached up and adjusted the collar of my jacket, fingers grazing my neck. The touch was small, but it grounded me more than any pep talk. Amara, he said, voice low, you know you don't owe anyone grace for how they treated you on the way up. Not Harris, not the contractor, not anyone. You're allowed to be angry. You're allowed to remember. I know, I said. You're also allowed to stop carrying them with you, he added. You don't have to take their words into orbit. That hit deeper than I expected. How many times had I planned arguments in my head, imagined the perfect clapback, replayed slights like training footage? How much weight had I packed that wasn't in any duffel? I'll try, I said. Good. Save your payload capacity for something useful. I laughed, soft and genuine. Nerd. Future nerd in space, he corrected. Present nerd on Earth, I said. And boyfriend. Don't forget that part. Never. We stood there for a moment longer. Then I leaned up and kissed him. It wasn't dramatic. No fireworks, no swelling music. Just two people pressing forehead to forehead after, breathing the same air, sharing the same quiet knowledge. Tomorrow would be different. When I finally stepped back, he let me go. Text me when you land, he said. Yes, sir. He groaned. Don't start. See you in Houston, Commander. See you in Houston, Captain. Inside, alone, I set my alarm, checked my orders one more time, and lay on the unfamiliar bed staring at the ceiling. My mind tried to wander back to that dinner, to Harris's voice, to the phrase that had once felt like a brand pressed into my skin. Quota error. The words came, but they didn't stick this time. They slid off some new surface inside me, something hardened not into bitterness, but into clarity. They had wanted me to believe I was an accident, but nothing about my life had been accidental. Not the hours of study, not the grit, not the decision to raise my hand and say I'll go when everyone else took a step back. Not the moment I sat across from an IG officer and told the truth without flinching. Not the way I chose, again and again, to stay in a system that wasn't built for me and make room anyway. In the dark, I pictured myself in a flight suit with my name stitched over my heart. I pictured the world small and blue outside a window. I pictured the silence up there. Not empty, but full. A space big enough to hold everything I was and everything I refused to be reduced to. In that vast quiet, nobody would be able to tell me I was a checkbox. In that orbit, the only quotas that mattered would be oxygen, fuel, and the limits of human endurance. Sleep finally came, slow and deep. Morning came faster. At the gate, boarding pass in my hand, orders in my bag, I took one last look at the terminal behind me. At the base beyond that, at the chapter I was closing. Then I stepped forward. They called my group. "Captain Okoye," the attendant said, glancing at my ID. "Thank you for your service." I nodded. "Thank you." As I walked down the jet bridge toward the plane that would take me to Houston, to training, to whatever came next, I felt every step settle into a single, steady truth. I was not a quota. I was not an error. I was exactly where I was supposed to be, on a trajectory I'd plotted for myself, long before anyone else noticed I was moving. And this was just the beginning.